Good afternoon, Milan. Welcome to our sample legal English lesson. So, how are you today?
Quite fine. Looking forward to it.
Me too. So, I thought we would start with a warm up as usual. So, I have a couple of questions. I'm wondering if you've thought about one legal term in English that you've always wanted to understand better.
I think it might be due process.
Yeah, sure. So we'll talk about due process today and the role that it plays in the American legal system. It's sort of the basis for the American legal system. I guess you have something like this in the Czech Republic where, let's say you're arrested. What would happen to you in the Czech Republic? I guess there are some procedures, right?
Of course, there are some procedures, but I have no personal.
You haven't been arrested yet.
I haven't been arrested yet, and I am not this type of lawyer who goes to prisons and courts and things like this. So,
what kind of law do you do? Tell me about the kind of law that you practice or have practiced.
It's more related to the working of the government and
Sure.
Things like this as a state employee. So it's not the penal law.
Right. But you probably have due process even in this area. So let's say you might. Yeah. So, for example, you might have to hire an employee. Maybe you want to tell me about a time where you had difficulty hiring an employee. Maybe you had some legal problems with hiring the employee, or you had, I think maybe one time you even mentioned something about having difficulty hiring an employee because the employee had interviewed with you and you had to interview them again because of some legal requirement that you have to hire, that you have to interview. If you only have one or two candidates, then you would have to interview them.
If we want to hire a new state or state office employee, there is a special legislation about it, special bill which says that we have to interview all the applicants which fulfills all the required limits, or was the right word for this?
Well, probably all the requirements of the job, right?
All the requirements, like, I don't know, education,
Sure.
Language knowledge, and things like this.
Yeah.
And then we have to invite them all to see us for an interview, which has some special rules, some general rules. Maybe it's better to say general.
Maybe certain questions you can ask and certain questions you cannot ask.
Of course, but that's valid in general. That we are not allowed to ask someone. No, I don't know whether some type of questions are not allowed. Of course, like I don't know. Do you plan to have kids or something like this?
Right. It's for protection of the candidate, right?
Of course. Usually the interview is in a in the schema, like first we will tell you something about the job, about the company or office, and so on. Then the second part, tell us something about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What are your skills? Where did you study? Where did you work before? And so on. And then some time or then some part of the interview for some questions for especially when the applicants want to ask something that we didn't say, or he wants to know, or she wants to know.
Mm.
And that's
and
it.
You would also have like a due process. Let's say you wanted to, you had an employee and you were working for the government and you want to fire them. You probably have protections in place so that you can't just fire somebody because you don't like the color of their shoes, for example.
Of course not. There are special rules for firing people. Mm-hmm. And it's quite difficult to fire someone.
Yeah. So you would have to check all the boxes. You've got a checklist. You have to do X, Y, and Z. Yes. And then you could fire them.
And there is a procedure, like it's not possible to fire someone mm-hmm. in a moment. Like there must be some kind of notice. Well, you are not working well. You did this, then this. You have 1 month to improve it, and so on. Then maybe another notice, and then well, and it also depends on the weight of the failures. So mm-hmm. for minor failures, it's more notices.
The severity. So the more severe the offense, you might have a different outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's different when someone goes to work in blue shoes. Then
small offense.
Yeah, it's a really small offense, but it's a much bigger offense when we catch someone with a knife under the dead body of his boss.
Ah, well, there you go. Great example. But even then, you still have due process. You have to have what we call probable cause in order to arrest them, right?
Of course.
You can't just arrest people for no reason.
Yeah, then it's not our cause. Then it's a penal process.
For example.
So it's a job for police and other people.
Yeah,
police and court and so on.
Yeah, exactly.
But it will also end in a termination of job in our office.
Yeah, exactly. I'm wondering, like, how familiar are you with U.S. legal documents? Maybe you can think of one legal document you've read in English before.
Well, the truth is that I don't remember whether I have ever read any U.S. Legal document mm-hmm. before. Maybe I saw the U.S. Constitution or something like this. Really the basic, really basic one.
Yeah, fair enough.
But
I mean,
it is a long time ago.
It's the cornerstone of the U.S. legal system, right? This is the basis for which we have due process, for example. So maybe we could talk about some words, and maybe the first word we can talk about is due process, right? So this is perfect. It aligns well with what I wanted to discuss today. I wonder if you want to read the definition, if it's not too small for you.
It's a constitutional guarantee that the government must act fairly and follow established legal procedures before depriving anyone of life, liberty, or property.
Yeah.
So something like a fair process.
Yeah, right. This is mainly talking about how the government acts, in the U.S. legal framework. It talks mainly or thinks about how the government acts toward, well, itself, but also to the people, most importantly, because the Constitution is telling the people these are the frameworks for which we decide what is fair and just, right? For example, we might have sort of different requirements about how we arrest somebody. For example, we have to have probable cause, which is, to say that we must present some evidence in a formal way to a judge or a magistrate that the police or the FBI or some other law enforcement would present, maybe with the help of the district attorney, which is the head of the prosecutorial service for a particular city or state or whatever. And, we might have certain requirements of those people that they present, shall we say, in a lawful way, evidence, so that we can then go and issue a warrant. And we'll get to that word later, but that would allow us to then go and arrest somebody, right?
I remember one legal term or one legal
okay.
word. It's a burden of proof. Burden of proof,
absolutely. So if the government wants to arrest somebody to withdraw their liberty, then they must provide a certain burden of proof. And we have different levels of burden of proof, right? So we can talk a little bit about that later on, about what those levels are. But even to get due process, we had to amend our constitution, because the Constitution, as it was originally written, primarily was concerned about how the government should behave to itself. In other words, we have judiciary, we have executive branch, and we have legislative branch. So the primary purpose of the Constitution was to lay out what is the responsibility of each of these branches of government. But it didn't really do enough to protect the people. So we had to create an amendment to the Constitution. And I wonder if you know how an amendment is created in the Constitution.
No, I have heard about amendments quite a lot of time, because, it's in every second movie that it's according to amendment number something, like the fifth or first, or I don't know which amendment.
Yeah, we have a few.
The process of
yeah, well, to do an amendment, you have to have both houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, have to approve it. And they can't approve it with 50% of the votes. They have to win 2/3 of the votes.
Mm-hmm.
We have 435 people in the House of Representatives, so 2/3 of those people have to vote yay. And then in the Senate, we have 100, so you'd have to have, I guess, 67 people vote yay in order to pass it through Congress. But that's not all. We then have to pass it through the states, and 3 out of 4 states have to approve it as well. So this usually takes quite a lot of time, and that's why this cumbersome process means we don't have a lot of amendments it's less than 30. So in 250 years, it's, I would say it was more amendments initially. We started with 10, and we'll get to that later. But yeah, it's not so often that we change our constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say we want to file, let's say you want to file a lawsuit because maybe the government wrongly filed you. You would petition the court. So maybe you can talk about that definition.
Mm-hmm. Shall I read it?
Yeah, please.
Petition is an application to a court for a writ, judicial action in a suit, etc. Example, a divorce petition.
Yeah. So, for example, if you wanted to get divorced, then you would go to the court. You would say, "Hey, I want to get divorced. I'm tired of being married. Here's my petition to file for divorce." It's like a request or a complaint or a demand directed at the government, because in the United States, at least, marriage in this case is a government function. So the government marries people. It's not solely through the church. But we were talking before about due process, and part of due process is seizure. So we might have some due process to seize some property. It's the other part of life and liberty. We want to have certain property rights in the United States. And if the government wants to take those away, then they would have to seize them. So you can maybe read the definition for me.
Seizure is the action of confiscating or impounding property by warrant of legal right.
And it's when the government is taking that property from an individual, or it could be from a company or something like that. Usually it's by physical force, or it could be something like restraining the liberty of a citizen. So if I prevent a citizen from walking the streets, it could be a seizure of that citizen, right? We call this arresting someone.
So in this meaning, it's a thing of penal law. So it's something like a fine or something.
It could be, it could be a seizure of money. Let's say you're a drug dealer in the United States. If you are selling drugs, the United States can petition a court to seize your money because it's ill-gotten gains. And anything you may have bought, like a house, through those ill-gotten gains can be seized, because it's referred to as the fruit of a poison tree. We use this phrase. Maybe you have it in Czech as well.
Yes, it's.
I think it's quite illustrative. Well, let's take a look at. Let's do some text review and take a look at one document, the Bill of Rights, which I mentioned before. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 of the amendments to the United States Constitution, and it wasn't passed at the same time that the Constitution was passed. It was actually ratified by these 3/4 of states in 1791. So that was like 4 years after they ratified the Constitution. So it took a bit of time. But this was meant to provide individual liberties and limit government power. So maybe let's take a look at one that we already discussed relating to due process and seizure. Here's the Fourth Amendment. Do you want to read it?
The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath of affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution.
So there's a few elements here. Number one, you have to have probable cause. So you cannot issue a warrant based on facts that don't exist out of thin air, right? We have to show something that's real. You can't just imagine it, right? We have to have a neutral magistrate or judge, somebody who's not partial to the government side and not partial to the individual side or the company side. And then they must state what we call particularity. This is stating where in the warrant the officers can search. So they can't just search anywhere they want, right? They have to say, for example, they want to search, for example, the basement of the individual's house or the whole house, right? Because that's where they think the evidence might be. So they don't, what the point of it was to prevent general warrants, which is the whole point of the United States was thinking about the kind of like the reason that the United States exists is because they were unhappy with the British government. And the colonists were not happy with these general seizures and searches that the British Army would conduct against them. And this led to the revolution. And then, of course, scope and execution. So the officers must follow the limits of the warrant. Otherwise, it's not valid and the evidence cannot be used in court. And if they go beyond the scope, let's say they search the neighbor's house and the warrant says they can only search the house of this individual. They search the neighbor's house against approval of the neighbor, for example, or maybe a different property than specified in the warrant, and the individual doesn't consent, then that evidence wouldn't be allowed in court either because the search would be unconstitutional. So there's a scope to the warrant. So it's a very important part of the Constitution. Let's maybe think about how you would explain that to a client. So let's say I'm an attorney, or no, you're my attorney. Yeah? I'm a client and I've been arrested. So like maybe you can think of a couple of...
If I'm your attorney, my condolences, you go to jail.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is what we're trying to avoid, right? So I want to avoid jail in this case. I've been arrested. You can imagine what the charge could be. What kind of questions might you ask? Give me a couple of questions that you might ask me to determine whether I've been arrested properly.
So I'm not good in the US law, but
well, you're going to learn it now.
As your attorney, probably I would ask whether your rights according to the Fourth Amendment were violated or not. So probably I'll ask whether they told you about your rights.
Sure.
Whether they were searching you, who was searching you, how you were searched, how you were arrested, whether you were informed why you are arrested.
Who arrested me? It's probably it's sort of the whole like journalist asks who, why, what, where, when, how. Yeah, it's a bit like that, right? Yeah, that's good. If there was a warrant, we just spoke about warrants. Sometimes they show a warrant. Not always. If it's a spontaneous arrest, there wouldn't be if they saw me shoot someone, then they can just arrest me. They don't need to go to the judge and say, I saw this guy shoot this other guy. Can you give me a warrant? So you're looking for probable cause. Oh, well, yeah, and maybe you said it already, but if they asked me, did they ask me if I consented to being searched, for example? Because if I consent, then it doesn't matter. I say, search me, go crazy. Then I don't get that. I don't get to retain that right. I've given up that right.
But I suppose this is not a very common answer for that question in the US. Search me.
Well, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. Yeah. Okay. So that kind of I think is a nice little overview of the Fourth Amendment. So maybe let's wrap up now. And so today we worked with authentic legal text, the Fourth Amendment, and we explained it in clear English, exactly the skills that lawyers need in cross-border practice. I don't know if you have any other questions.
I think not now.
Okay, fine, fair enough. So let me wrap it up by saying that in this 10-week course, we expand this curriculum into contracts and negotiations and courtroom English, and really a lot more. So thanks for watching this sample lesson. I hope you get something out of it, and I look forward to improving your legal English. Have a great day.